We're all fine. We're all fine.
We're okay.
We're okay.
We're doing great.
That seems a little crooked, don't it?
That's all right. It just reflects how I feel. Just a little off.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Chop and Brew. I am Chip Walton. I'm here hanging out with some beautiful lilacs in Midway, St. Paul. Spring is in full bloom around here, and that also means things like sour cherries specifically are in season, and that happens to be what this episode is all about. I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite fermented beverages I've ever made in my 15 years of home brewing, a Sour Cherry Hard Cider. As you're about to hear, it's a hard cider that I fermented out and then conditioned on 5 pounds of North Star sour cherries. Beautiful, absolute beautiful color, deep pink, deep red, just a wonderful beverage. We're about to get into it. I'm going to tell you how it was made, and more importantly, the end result, how it tastes. I have 2 sets of tasting notes. One with Nina Houts, who at the time was representing Imperial Yeast. She comes over to hang out, taste the cider, talk about the fermentation, talk a little bit about what people can expect in general when using A40 Bubbles, Imperial's hard cider strain that comes out in the fall time. And then another awesome tasting session with my friend Chef Zander Dixon, who happened to provide the sour cherries for this project. He shares a lot of good culinary insight on other ways of using sour cherries, everything from infused spirits, baked goods, other fermented beverages. So you're in for a most excellent chop and brew episode coming up here, and also more stuff coming up because Chef Zander's offered more sour cherries. He and I thought we would make a sour cherry cider vinegar as one project, and a couple of other things that we're riffing on, so stay tuned for that. Before we get into it, a quick reminder that all Chop and Brew episodes are brought to you with support from Imperial Yeast, whose Bubbles hard cider strain is a most excellent choice for your cider fermentation at home. Bookmark it now for this fall's orchard fresh cider, and you will not regret it. And our Patreon party people, they are the tree that the apples and sour cherries of Chop and Brew do not fall far from. Join them in supporting the show at patreon.com/chopandbrew. What's up, everybody? Chip Walton, Chop and Brew, here with Imperial Yeast, Nina Houts.
Hey.
Houts is in the house. Sure you've never heard that before.
Never.
I'm putting her on something that I didn't even think about doing a video on, but I'm going to do it. This is a Sour Cherry Hard Cider from the basement.
Basement cider. Love that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So as the provider of the North Star sour cherries, I wanted to ask my good friend and neighbor, Chef Zander Dixon, for his thoughts not only on the Sour Cherry Hard Cider, cheers.
Cheers.
But also other things that you can cook, ferment, bake with sour cherries. There are other applications because 'tis the season.
'Tis the season.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, I should have walked it. I've had it so many times. The nose alone just has this cherry pie with no sugar in it.
Yeah.
Kind of smell to it.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That really came through.
Yeah. So I wanted to present this to Nina. This was fermented with bubbles, which is quite often the fall seasonal, and it definitely was last year. You might remember the video. I recapped our club cider pickup. So we get these 2 giant square totes from an orchard outside the cities. They come, it gets a giant umbilical cord hooked up to it, and they just dose it out 5 at a time into buckets, fermenters. And Eben was gracious enough to hook us up with a dozen packets of bubble. So I showed up like Santa Claus, like Mardi Gras Santa Claus, just throwing out packets of bubble. One of the goals is to get at least half a dozen of those people maybe together because they all did very different things. So, but a 1052 cider, aerated, nutrients, bubbles, just fermented. My plan was to do kind of low and slow, but I think I kind of just forgot about it and it just went low and long.
Low and long.
So about a month ago, I realized, holy crap, that cider's in there. I bet it's turned because it's been sitting on its own yeast, but my basement's 50. in the winter, as you'll soon learn, your basement will be 2 lager temperatures. So I was like, you know what? I've got my friend across the street, Chef Zander, and his wife have North Star Sour Cherry trees. They had given me a bag 2 years ago, probably, frozen. So I thawed those, hit them with a little bit of chemical to kind of like stabilize and make sure they didn't ferment again as they were thawing, and put them into a fermenter. Took a bite of one before I did that, I took a bite of one, nearly broke my tooth because there's pits in it. And I was like, well, I know I should pit this. And in the past I have, but I was like, I'm lazy. And that turned out to be like the blessing in disguise, because man, I feel like those pits, and I've had mead makers and cider makers confirm this since kind of putting it out there, like malab is the spice they keep comparing it to, which I guess it's ground cherry pits. It tastes like almond.
Yes.
Almond extract without the phoniness.
Yeah.
Is that what you kind of get?
That is absolutely. This is so good, by the way. Like, really good.
Not back sweetened at all. I mean, some people would argue like a little might accentuate these things. Elsa and I just like really brute. Hey, Teddy, we're recording a video.
We're selling cookies. 25 cents. one cookie.
Can you come back on your way around? Hey, can you come back on your way around? I'm recording a video with my friend here.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, dude. We just got interrupted by the neighbor, and I'm leaving this in. We just got interrupted by the neighborhood children.
I kind of want a cookie. They're selling them for 25 cents. No.
I'm like, do you take debit card, man?
You take Venmo?
Can I
Come
sell
back
you?
Here.
First and foremost, what do you think of how it turned out?
I think this is a fabulous example of the cherry fruit, the sour cherry fruit, just the way it comes off the tree. I get everything from this that I would get out of biting into a fresh sour cherry. Our cherry trees just blossomed 3 days ago. I see little cherries forming in the blossoms now. So we're looking at about 2 to 3 weeks before we're picking a fresh batch for this year.
Cool. What do you yield? You gave me like 5 or 6 pounds. What do you yield on average from the tree?
Well, we've got 2 dwarf trees, and each tree will probably give us about 10 pounds. So we'll end up with 20. Although, no, that's not true. One year we got like 40 pounds of cherries. Depends on the year, but I would say 20 to 40 pounds a year off of 2 trees.
Okay. And when you say this gives you the flavors of that sour cherry off the tree, what are those? What's the range of flavors that a cherry can have, and then that this dives into?
Well, a sour cherry, which I think is the best baking cherry, gives you that like tart, bright red cherry flavor, but it's also very tart. It's as tart as a raw plain cranberry, if you're familiar with that. Some people like it. I like it. I'll eat it. But for a lot of people, it's just way too sour and not nearly sweet enough. People think, Bing cherries are what most people are used to. This is a far cry from a Bing cherry. So this is a tart, sour, red cherry. It's closer to a red currant or a cranberry than it is to a Bing cherry.
Okay.
In terms of flavor. I like it because you can really get strong cherry flavor and acid balance, both in beverages like this, or if you're baking, you just add sugar to your heart's content. If you like it on the sour side, use less sugar. If you like it on the sweet side, use more sugar. If you use a lot of sugar, you're going to get that like true cherry flavor. When you think of like what's a cherry candy that we remember from our childhood?
Cherry bomb?
Cherry bombs, yeah. You get the cherry bomb flavor.
It's so real it almost tastes fake.
Exactly.
Like what they would do to emulate it is how it actually tastes.
As my father-in-law would say, tastes better than the real thing.
And it's definitely, you have that dryness, but it's not bone dry on the palate because you have that kind of lift added from, it's like the vanilla, kind of almondy. It's super nice. It's giving like a little bit of boozy soaked cherry in a really good way. So
what would that be like? Isn't there
what's the term?
Brandied cherries?
Brandy cherry?
Yeah.
But it's a little more tart than that. So
and it's like a double tart because I think it's the bone dry cider than the tartness from the cherries. But yeah, there's like this invisible layer of body that those pits made. So in general, when Bubbles comes out, how is it received, and kind of what's your usage suggestions when people have Bubbles?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great strain. It is so versatile for really anything cider wise. If you wanted to go straight apple and just have whatever apple varietal you're trying to showcase, it's going to show up really nicely, but it clearly plays well with any other fruit you're trying to throw at it. So you can expect it to get pretty dry in general. And for me personally, I like that in a cider. Nothing that's going to be cloyingly sweet or overpowering in that way. So that would be, my expectation for this strain is you can really throw it at anything in your season and expect some great results.
So something like this is meant for cider. What its range was like 55 to 65. So it can almost be treated kind of like a lager.
Yeah.
Which is why it's good to have it come out in the fall around here where it's ambiently that cold. If you push, so we were talking about lager yeast, fermented warm, still being pretty clean and say a cold IPA. Is there any data on pushing a cider strain super warm that you know of?
You know, we generally set these recommendations as what you're going to expect for most people getting the best results within this range. So that's not to say if you were to go a few degrees over or under, it would be terrible. But, you know, you can start expecting to have a bit of a sensory shift at either end. And if that's something that you're prepared for, then you can certainly go for it.
But I like this. I think you've done a spectacular job of capturing it dry. Yeah. I mean, I personally, again, I fall on the tart dry side. I don't like a lot of sugar in my flavors. There's a time and a place. Obviously, you can't live without it, but I try to use as little as possible, and I think this is the stuff.
Do you get this kind of almondy? I want to ask you about Malab, because is Malab actually made from the pits of cherries?
Malab is a pit, and it's kind of like a cherry pit, but it's a specific. I think it comes from the Asian crescent, like Turkey, that area. Turkey, Syria, that's where Malab mostly comes from.
Oh, okay. So Malab is the name of the actual fruit.
I think Malab is probably specific to the pit that you would buy.
Okay.
And it is used to impart an almond-like flavor. And yes, you'll get that. I get a little bit of that too. So you must have left the pits in this when you did it. And I actually recommend that because even when I make pies with pitted cherries, I won't use vanilla extract. I'll use almond extract because the cherry and almonds just go together beautifully. It's a very common combination.
And when you take the pit out, you're removing that kind of almond influence. So you're kind of bringing it back in the form of. It's not like you would make a pie with a cherry with a pit in it.
Well, you can't make a pie with a cherry with a pit in it because people want to eat the piece of fruit. But if you want that almondy flavor in, like when you made your wort or whatever it was that you, however you made this, you probably put them in and cooked them in that mix or just.
No, they were frozen the way you gave them to me. I thawed them. I put them in a bucket. I hit them with just a little bit of chemical to stabilize so they wouldn't re-ferment. And then I racked the finished cider onto it and conditioned it for about 3 weeks.
Okay, well.
So this is basically, you could call it like sour cherry infused cider.
And you know, that's what I do too. I'll take just the whole cherries, like before we freeze them, and I'll stuff them into a bottle of gin or a bottle of vodka. And we get this beautiful like cherry scented vodka or cherry scented gin. Great for martinis. Not bad in a gin and tonic, but I think once you start adding tonic water and other flavors to it, you sort of lose the effect of the essence of the cherry.
Yeah.
You know, it's a subtle thing, but it's very nice in a martini, for instance.
And you'll use fresh cherries for that, not frozen and thawed to break down the molecular cell walls.
Well, once you freeze it, it starts to break down, and the idea of putting in fresh cherries into the alcohol. And then when you infuse it, you also want to infuse that refrigerated. That'll give you the most pure extract. If you let it get too warm, it starts to get, you know, that dried fruit essence to it. And
interesting.
Not a bad thing, but not as good as the clean, bright, fresh flavor. You've got the yeast pretty good in this because it's not yeasty, which would kind of spoil the fruit a little bit. But you still get a little back on the back of the palate. You still get a little bit of a yeasty finish.
Okay.
Which for me puts it into the perfect, you know, chilled sparkling wine category. Like if you want to sit out on a hot summer day, with some nice cheeses and just enjoy the weather. Have a little something to cool you off and a little something that low alcohol to take the edge off your day. This is perfect.
Nice. I'm not the biggest. There's so many cider makers in this club that are like, they press 200 gallons and they have so many variants, and they'll do Nottingham, they'll do ale yeast, they'll do lager yeast, they'll do mead yeast. It's just like, for me, I've used this probably the last 3 years, and I feel like it just makes a nice, solid, clean. It goes dry. I think if I had stayed with that slow and low process that I was thinking I would do, the idea was I was going to halt it before it got too low. And instead of back sweetening it, which I didn't do anyway, it would have just been naturally sweet. The French cider process is how I have it explained to me. But I clearly didn't do that. But I'm intrigued by that. But I just like how, if you wanted to back sweeten it, you could. But I like that this makes a nice, for my taste, a brut cider.
Brut. Yes, that's a great descriptor for it.
We're going to call this Cherry Brut, Pink Brut.
Pink Brut.
Pink Brut Society.
Pink Brut Society. You got more bottles in this you can send me home with or something? I like this. Okay. I like it.
All right, well, from all of us here at the Pink Brut Society.
Pink Brut Society. First meeting.
Chop for chop, brew for brew. I would definitely suggest throwing some bubbles and some cider come this fall or any fall. Let it rip and roar, and then if you want, add some fruit to it. Cheers.
Cheers.
To borrow Forrest Gump, you got cherry turnovers, you got cherry pie, you got cherry jam, you got cherry preserves, you got cherry cider, you got cherry juice.
Sour cherry mead would be interesting to taste.
I think the honey would work well with this too. You're right. Yeah, I'd give it a shot with the mead and do it the same way. Basically, just pour it over, and
like rack and then let it sit on top of it.
Yeah,
or they float, so let it sit underneath it.
Or if you bottle your mead into like individual units, you could put some whole cherries just in the bottle.
Think so? I would try it. Be interesting. You never really see anybody like
give it a shot.
Dose individual bottles with fruit.
What's the alcohol in there?
This one mead?
In a mead, like
I would say 8 to 13, 6 to 13. Session mead would be 6 to 7.
If you're on the higher end of the alcohol, I'd say it's probably okay. If you're at the lower end of the alcohol, you might get some fermentation from the fruit that you don't want in there.
Yep.
So
maybe I'll find a better mead maker than I to recruit if I inherit more sour cherries from you.
Right.
But either way, if you find yourself needing someone to take some off your hands, we'll do this if nothing else again, because this was awesome.
I got about another 20 pounds in the freezer from last year. It's all yours.
With pits.
With pits.
Because I remember the first time you ever gave them to me, I pitted them. This is the second time I've done this with your cherries. Now remember, I pitted them. It took forever. And it is noticeably different to have ferment or to conditioned on the pits.
Yeah, I think the only reason you need to pit sour cherries, or any cherry for that matter, is if you're putting it in a pie or a turnover as a piece of fruit. But if you're making jam or something that you can strain, something that you're going to be able to remove those pits, but you still get all the cherry that you want out of it, I don't see any reason in pitting it. You know, pitting is a pain in the ass.
It was. Pitting was a pitta.
And it's a messy process too. You end up with cherry juice all over the place.
I remember stabbing myself a lot.
It also creates a more mangled cherry. You know, again,
in my case that wouldn't matter, but
well,
depending how pretty you're trying to make it.
I do. I make like maraschino cherries out of my sour cherries.
Oh, what is the I thought that was a certain kind of cherry. Maraschino is a reference to a process?
Well, I'm making these for cocktails. So basically what I do is I just preserve them, and I'll use a little amaretto to help in that. And then I soak them in sugar, put the amaretto on them, and preserve them that way. And I use those for, you know, Manhattans, old fashions, stuff like that. It's really good.
So you'll use these sour cherries for this?
Yeah.
You'll just use them instead of a maraschino cherry, which is a variety.
You also can pit them and then sugar them and dehydrate them if you've got a dehydrator. It's kind of nice to have them that way too.
For eating dried like raisins, or would you reconstitute them then when you were ready to use them?
Well, I would use those in cookies or, some baked I put it in bread sometimes.
Yeah.
Fruit loaf. It's also nice to use the dried cherries. Say if you've got some duck and you want to make a sour cherry sauce for the duck, you throw a few of the dried sour cherries in the sauce at the end before you put it on the duck. It's kind of nice.
Nice. Yeah. All the idea. And that's why I wanted to have Zander over, because my friend Nina came over and had a tasting, but we talked it way more from like a fermentation perspective, whereas I knew you would have a little more, some thoughts culinarily.
Right.
On not only the cider, but what to do with a bunch of sour cherries. All right, Zander man, cheers.
Cheers.
I'm empty, that's bad luck, but fill up just
Fill
a
it
little.
up for good luck.
We gotta make sure we save Elsa some though. This is literally the last bottle because Elsa enjoyed it so much that I was like, I better fill one bottle so Zander and I can do this. And then sure enough, it kicked.
Well, I'm loving this, you know, this is good stuff.
Cheers. Pink Brute. That's what I was calling it.
I know, that's a good name for it.